Good morning and welcome to Drew's Book Reviews. So, we're doing things a little bit different today, as I am in the process of reading Maps to Mirror, Orson Scott Card, the short fiction of Orson Scott Card. So, it's broken up into several sections and different types of stories. So, I thought that for this review, rather than waiting until I get through the whole book, I would review each grouping of stories separately as we go along. So the first section is titled Book One: The Hanged Man Tales of Dread. So this is like a collection of scary horror type stories that well freak you out. Quite honestly, um, a lot of them, not all of them, but most of them were pretty messed up, to put it simply. So the first story in this section is simply titled Eumenes in the Fourth Floor Laboratory. So this is kind of a creepy story about, the guy's basically an ass. Like, he's not a very nice person at all. And he's living in this apartment that everybody has to share a bathroom. So there's kind of a communal bathroom. And he comes across this demented baby like monster that seems to have been thrown away in the toilet, tried to flush down. It's got like these nasty little suction cup and razor sharp teeth type things. And basically, this monster begins to attack him and try to kill him. And he manages to turn around and defeat this monster. And in order to save his own hide, he has to basically dice it up into all these separate pieces. And he flushes it down the toilet and thinks, oh, thank goodness, it's done, it's over. Only to discover that this monster has not and will not be leaving him alone. It continues to haunt him. It continues to follow him. Somehow it never died, and it's still haunting him and following him everywhere he goes. So pretty creepy there. So the next story is titled Quietus. So this one is basically the story of this man who is effectively haunting his own home after his death, but he can't accept that he's dead. He thinks he's still alive, and he seems to be going crazy. He's flipping back and forth between having children and not having children, and he comes home to find this coffin in his living room, and he's tempted to open it, but he can't bring himself to do it, or his wife tells him, "No, don't open it. Don't, respect the dead." Um, and he's haunting his house until finally, at the end, he opens the coffin and accepts his own death. So it's actually a pretty cool story, I think. I really liked how it was done. Maybe not so much creepy, it's just more of a interesting perspective on ultimately the fate of us all, to accept our own deaths and what it might be like in the process of dying, and as our souls leave, as we try to wrap ourselves around the concept that we are in fact dead and to truly accept our fate. So that's a really interesting one. Probably one of my favorites of all the stories in here, actually, so far. And then after that, we've also got deep breathing exercises. So this is basically kind of a creepy premonition type story in which this man notices that one day his wife and his son are breathing in perfect harmony and perfect sync, but not consciously. And then it was like a premonition as they die shortly after that. And then he begins to notice this happening throughout his life, and groups of people start breathing in perfect harmony with each other, almost like a death premonition, only to just find in the end that he has become one of those people. And he has a premonition of his own death, so that's kind of creepy as well. So definitely, that also, I'd have to say, was one of my favorites of this set of stories in the Hanged Man Tales of Dread. Now, Fat Farm, not really one of my favorites, but definitely an interesting story. Personally, I don't think it was one of the best ones in this section, but still good. The concept being that this man goes to this clinic. He's a fat, overweight, and he goes to this clinic to trade in for a skinnier, more fit body. And his memories and his identity is transferred effectively to this cloned body, and where he thinks he will be able to live on in the clone while he dies peacefully in his sleep. It turns out he's actually been sold into bondage and slavery, and sold off to effectively the fat farm, where he has to spend years working under the harsh slave master, and discovers he wasn't the only one. Closing the timeline. Now, that's an interesting kind of a time travel story. Not really a horror story, not really a tale of dread or anything, but basically the story about these people that are obsessed with the experience of dying. They want to know what it's like to die. And so they have these time capsules or time machines, which allow them to go back in time, um, to find unique ways of killing themselves or getting killed. And once that happens, their bodies rematerialize in the present after experiencing death. So just kind of a unique or interesting little story, not really dreadful, not really horrible. Definitely wouldn't call it that by any means. And then we have Freeway Games. So this is basically this guy that becomes obsessed with following people. Uh, he becomes so obsessed with following people, in fact, he actually gets some kind of sick, even sexual pleasure from doing so, as he follows people in the freeway on the highways and just follows them and watches them kind of freak out and get nervous, think, what the heck's going on? Why am I being followed? Who is this creep behind me? Until eventually these people start getting in these terrible accidents and dying. And this gives them some kind of sick, sadistic pleasure. So it's really kind of messed up and screwed up mentality in that one. And then we move on to A Sepulchre of Songs. This is, in a way, a very fascinating story in that you have this quadriplegic girl who desires so much to have the ability of others. And then you've got this character who's this alien on a spaceship who really wants to have a body because it's more of just this mind as in a spaceship, and this alien starts reaching out to this quadriplegic girl who wants to have all the abilities of a physical body that she doesn't have, and starts to basically seduce her mind in an effort to get her to swap or change places with her. And eventually that, of course, does happen. So kind of the reverse Pinocchio in a way, I guess. A girl that wants to be a machine, and a machine that wants to be a girl. Prior Restraint is an interesting tale about a writer who never finishes a story and why he never finishes a story. It's not that great of a story. I think overall it's probably the least impactful of all the stories. Not a lot of depth to it, just kind of a interesting story about a writer explaining why he never finishes anything. The Changed Man and the King of Words. This is a story about tarot card reading, and this kid that basically programs a computer to be a tarot card reader, and his parents kind of get freaked out about this, and because of how accurate it is, and so it really starts thinking about their life and how it impacts them, and really it's a story, when all said and done, about the relationship between a father and his son, and a mother and her son, more than anything else. Definitely a good kind of family relationship type story when all said and done. Now, Memories of My Head. This is actually probably one of my absolute favorites in the Tales of Dread section of this book. Memories of My Head. Basically, it is the story of a guy who has committed suicide. He's blown off his head, but he's writing a letter explaining why he blew off his head after he's blown off his head. So it's a headless corpse basically sitting at a desk writing a letter explaining himself. And graphic detail too, which kind of adds to the Hangman Tales of Dread section of it. I think really kind of enhances the story. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely one of my favorites. And of course, while he's writing, his head slowly starts to reform onto his own body. So kind of defeated the purpose. And he begins to wonder if he's done this before, and how many times. Anyway, Memories of My Head. Great story. Definitely one of my favorites. And The Lost Boys. So this one, based on the essay afterwards, is definitely one of the most personal stories Orson Scott Card has read. And he really relates it to his own family experience. He actually wrote this one as if it were a 100% true story. Characters in the story are his own family members, himself, his wife, and his kids. and if anybody's read The Lost Boys, this is the short story. It was eventually developed into a larger novel, which I've also read. But basically, the idea that this boy has been uprooted, his family's been uprooted, had to move to a new town, and he has no friends. He is a lonely boy who starts to make imaginary friends. And what he finds is that the imaginary friends all end up having the same names as missing boys from the town, boys who have disappeared. And kind of a creepy ghost story, actually, which is really probably one of my favorite Orson Scott Card stories. Honestly, you know, definitely in the top five of Orson Scott Card stories. Ender's Game, of course, being the absolute top. Um, so I definitely really enjoyed the Tales of Dread section of this book, and I would certainly, at this point at least, definitely recommend that. So up next, we have Book 2, Flux, Tales of Human Futures, would be the next section within this book. So definitely stay tuned for that, as I'm sure that'll definitely make for an interesting and fun read. Definitely more in the science fictionary things, and I'll be happy to provide some insight and review on the stories in that section. So don't forget to stay tuned, and as always, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned for Tales of Humanity's Future, the next section in The Maps in a Mirror, the short fiction of Orson Scott Card. Thank you very much, and have a great day.